So the overview is, this is what we're going to be looking at, is how do we help young people to identify and express what's going on for them. Some top tips on kind of what to do and what not to do, a whole smattering of kind of resources and skills, and then kind of where to go for more help and support. A lot of this is not rocket science, it's quite basic, you may have heard it before, but there's a positive to that. One, it's a refresher of skills. Two, it will allow you to know that you're on the right track. And three, the most basic things work. Sometimes it's the most basic things that are the most effective. So I really hope you take something useful away with you today. I want to start with expectations. The balance of kind of what they want with what they need. Young people, particularly adolescents, will give a really good verbal account of what exactly it is that they want or what they don't like. However, as adults and as adult caregivers, sometimes we need to adjust and moderate their expectations, not only of other people, but of themselves. I also think we need to do this ourselves. As parents and carers, we need to kind of check our own expectations of what young people can be expected to do, what they're able to do, and that's across the board, but specifically around kind of emotional ability to regulate themselves. We know that young people, they don't finish developing their emotional ability to cope with emotions until well into their 20s, And so sometimes our expectations of young people is slightly out. Also, as parents and carers, our expectations of what others, particularly services, are able to offer and provide sometimes might not be quite right. Sometimes we might expect or want a school, a social worker, a healthcare professional to be able to do something or provide something that actually is not within the remit that they're able to do for a whole host of reasons. It's not uncommon for a CAMHS worker to be presented with an unwell young person with the expectation of fix them. You cannot fix mental health difficulties. You cannot cure mental health difficulties. Some of the purpose and remit of CAMHS is to help support in a recovery journey, but there has to be a point where a young person is willing and ready and able to work with that CAMHS worker. We can't magically make people ready to recover or want to recover or engage in what we're doing. So it's about expectations of what is realistic, what is it that people are able to do. And similarly, if you're a professional, if you're an education professional, social worker professional or healthcare professional, think about what expectations we have of parents. Are they realistic? And so for me, it's often about thinking when there's arguments and friction between services or between parents and services or between young people and their parents, it often comes down and boils down to expectation and a miscommunication of expectation or goals. And so communication is vital throughout this whole process, being really clear about what is the need or difficulty, what is it that we're wanting, what is it that people are realistically able to offer and provide? And what is it that we're aiming to get to within this? So it's worth thinking about expectations. Now, a couple of pictures here. This is Maslow's hierarchy. Bit difficult to see, I know. Normally we start with kind of the basics around food, water and shelter. We've added on Wi-Fi and battery for our young people today. But it is also about thinking about frame of reference. What is important to young people? Where are they coming at? Where's their starting point? And where's our own starting point about what's important and what needs to happen? Because if they're mismatched, that also creates a barrier and a difficulty. Again, thinking that we're a CAMHS clinician here, often a young person, what they want will be very different from what their parent wants. And that's very difficult then for a CAMHS clinician to moderate and be caught in the middle of. So often in the initial parts of when we're working with young people, working with families, working with professionals, we will want to know, what are your expectations and are they realistic? Because we don't want to kind of set anybody up to not meet their expectations and then feel that sense of failure. Metaphors and analogies are great If you ask a young person how they're feeling, you're likely to get, don't know. You're lucky if you get, feel like shit. Okay, well, what does that mean? How do we unpack that? It is very, very difficult for young people to identify their emotions. I do a lot of work with schools, and I go in and I do work with primary school. It's amazing. Young people, adolescents included, do not know the difference between emotions. They do not know the difference between anxiety and anger. They cannot tell them apart. So they can use the words, but when you drill it down and you ask them, what does that mean? What does it feel like? What does it look like? A lot of young people have real difficulty in identifying what it is they're actually feeling. Partly because we're human and very rarely do we experience one emotion at one time. Normally it's compounded, we feel lots of things at any one time, and young people, their emotions can be really labile and they can change really frequently. So asking a question, how do you feel? Possibly not that helpful. So we want to use some metaphors and analogies. First one I've got here is a wheel of emotions. Different emotions, different words. And we use this in our primary school work. And what we do is we first of all talk about the word and think of kind of synonyms, other words that mean the same as kind of worry or sad or angry or happy. And then we start thinking about, what does that feel like in your body? How do you know when you're anxious? Is it that your heart races? Is it that you get sweaty hands? Is it that you get a lump in your throat, a dry throat? Is it that your heart is racing really, really fast? And then what happens in your body when you're angry? What happens in your body when you're sad? And starting to pick out and differentiate, how does your body tell you or inform you that you're feeling an emotion? Because our bodies hold the key. They're giving you signals and symptoms, and it's about helping young people identify, when I feel this physical symptom in my body, that might be a clue that I'm feeling something emotionally. We often assume that young people will just get this, but why would they? Because this isn't stuff that gets taught. And that's why it's no surprise to me when I go into schools and young people cannot tell me the specific differences between emotions like anxiety and anger. And it's complicated. I know from my own personal experience, when I'm really, really angry, I often cry. And people will say, oh, you're upset. No, I'm not, I'm fuming. So some of the kind of stereotypical responses or behaviours that we get to certain emotions might also fit for other things, and that's confusing. The other thing we do with a board like this is then we start thinking about triggers. When might we start to feel these things? What sorts of situations might we feel worry or anger or sadness? And helping young people to cue into that and knowing that it's okay to feel lots of different things at the same time. The thermometer is a really good one. Young people understand that sliding scale from cool to hot. And sometimes you can use a sliding scale. So how emotionally are you feeling? What's your emotional temperature? Are you red hot? And you could define that with a young person. That might be for a young person who experiences a lot of anger. Are you red hot and angry? Or cool and green and calm? It might be when you're at the top of your scale, that's when you're at your most sad. So you can use a sliding scale. They get that sense of what's your emotional temperature. The fizz. Talk about if you've ever had like a can of Coke or a bottle of Coke and you shake it and then you open it and it explodes. Talk about ourselves being like Coke bottles, and how shook up are you? How fizzy are you feeling? Are you feeling quite calm, or are you feeling like you're literally about to explode? So it's quite a visual metaphor, that, and young people often get that. And then there's the beach ball. We all have a beach ball that we carry around with us. And some of them are huge, great big balls filled with worries and thoughts and feelings and experiences and memories that are quite overwhelming. And other people, their balls might be quite small and they can kind of carry around fairly easily. Now, if your beach ball is massive and you are totally overwhelmed by thoughts and feelings and experiences and memories, if you're carrying that around all day long, and I often, when I work with young people, I have a massive ball, it's like this, it's huge. It's exhausting carrying it around. If you have to carry it around for an hour, you'd be a little bit tired. If you had to carry it around all day, you'd be knackered. If you had to carry it around all week, well, you'd stop functioning. It gets in the way. It stops you being able to do other activities and socialise. And so we have to find ways of making this ball more manageable. Yeah, so it's still saying we've all got baggage, we've all got stuff, we've all got thoughts and feelings, and sometimes they're challenging, but we need to find a way to make it a little bit more manageable. So all of these things help young people to kind of express where they're at and how big or little or how challenging things are. You can rate it by numbers, you can choose colour charts, anything that's just a little bit more specific than how are you feeling. So identifying feelings is a really important skill, and it's one that lots of people struggle with. So that's kind of the first step, that we need to help young people just to be able to identify what's actually going on for them. This is a graph that's called the window of tolerance. All of us, every single person, has a window of tolerance. And this essentially is what we can cope with. All right? Some of us have got a large window of tolerance, and you'll know people like that. They're the people where life has just thrown them curveball after curveball after curveball, and they're still getting up, and you're thinking, how are you still standing? Life has just hammered you, but yet you seem to be able to cope and function. Big window of tolerance, able to cope with a lot of stuff. Other people, window of tolerance is quite narrow, and so become really overwhelmed quite quickly. And within that window of tolerance, life goes up and down. And for some people, it can go up and down relatively steadily like this. Other people, it's up and down like this. And so you're bouncing from coping to not coping, coping to not coping. And that can be quite overwhelming as well. So as well as kind of the breadth of your window of tolerance, like what you can actually cope with, the speed at which you cope with stuff, the intensity in which you cope with stuff can really vary. When you go outside of your window of tolerance, up here we've got hyperarousal, which is when you feel too much. And this is often when you see some quite explosive behaviour. And if you think about, you can use this on yourself. If you think about what it's like when you get pushed to a point where you feel completely overwhelmed and you feel that things are too much, you'll go one of two ways. Hyperarousal is when you completely shut down, shut off, withdraw. And I'm sure you can think of young people, whether they're your own or if you're professional, young people that you work with, where they completely just shut off, shut down, don't speak, withdraw, avoid. And you've got others where they become very dysregulated, very emotional, quite expressive. All of that's normal, and we all have the ability to go in and out of our window of tolerance. This is really powerful because not only do we have a window of tolerance, and we all differ in terms of what pushes us out of the window of tolerance and what can bring us back within what we can cope with. Let's take again the example. If me and a friend differ, say we have a really big argument, okay? I take quite a while. Once I'm up here, it takes me quite a while to come back down into a window of tolerance where I'm able to engage in some logical, lucid, calm conversation. So it takes me a little while, maybe a couple of days, before I'm ready to do a reparation or I'm ready to talk it through. She's different from me. She comes down straight away. And for her, she wants to repair it straight away. If you're different, if you're mismatched, that's going to be a problem. And you will see that in young people. Some young people will explode and then very quickly feel very sorry, want to make it better, want to move on, and seemingly just bounce back as if nothing's happened at all. Other young people will take a long time to calm down and come out of that emotionally distressed state. And sometimes if you're there trying to make a reparation or trying to problem solve, trying to kind of work through it, if they're not ready, that's going to be very, very difficult. And if you try and push somebody who's not ready, they're likely to spike back up outside of their window of tolerance because they're already operating very high and they need their emotion to calm down a little bit before they can engage in that work. This is really important for young people who are in crisis or who are highly, highly anxious. So we have to kind of be aware and be kind of mindful that all young people are slightly different. Now I know that's very difficult, particularly for professionals and education professionals where you've got a lot of young people, where it's hard to tailor it exactly to each and every young person. But hopefully this will give you an awareness around why some people respond in the ways that they do, and why it takes longer for some young people to be able to kind of get to a level where they can cope a little bit better. I have a slightly different model. It's similar but slightly different. This is called the wise mind model. And each of us can be in these different states, and each of us may feel more naturally at home in one of these states. Over here, we've got something called rational mind. And these people tend to be quite cool, calm, collected, don't do emotions at all, very kind of factual, very detached, very black and white, which is really helpful in some situations. Because sometimes we do need to be quite logical, and we need to, like when we're buying tickets, we need to be able to know what we're doing, right? However, life would be pretty dull and pretty boring if we had no emotional responses. Emotions are functional, they're practical, they're helpful, they help us assess danger, they help us to kind of respond in helpful ways. So we don't want to be completely devoid of emotion. However, the other end of the spectrum is emotional mind. Okay, and here, this is where our responses and our behaviour is really powerfully driven by our emotions. So people who sit firmly in emotional mind tend to be quite reactive, quite impulsive. I feel something, I'm going to do something. And don't necessarily always consider the consequences. Okay? And so if we think of kind of rational mind being like cold and icy blue, here we've got red hot and reactive. So what we want to strive for with young people is developing something called wise mind, where you've got a foot in both camps, where you're able to feel emotion, acknowledge emotion, but not impulsively react on that, to be able to employ your rational mind, your logical mind, to think through, okay, I'm really angry, but if I punch that person in the face, there's going to be a negative consequence, and that's going to be unhelpful. So it's about validating, I'm feeling really angry. And then the wise mind response would be about then doing something about that anger that's adaptive rather than maladaptive and potentially harmful either to the young person or to somebody else. I say this like this is easy. It's not easy at all. But it's helpful to try and identify, one, where a young person naturally sits, because you'll have a natural preference for one or the other, and help them work towards developing the other side. So if you have a person that's naturally more an emotional mind, who's very kind of driven by their emotions, it's about helping them to problem solve in adaptive ways. If somebody's very much in rational mind, it's also helping them to identify their emotions. So doing some of that kind of body mapping work, what happens in my body when I'm feeling these things, like what kind of responses can I have, and how do I come somewhere in the middle? It's also useful to think about yourself in this situation, what your natural disposition is, so that when you're supporting a young person, you can think about the matches or mismatches. Particularly if you're in an antagonistic situation or an emotionally evocative situation. If you've been, sworn at, shouted, whatever, chances are your emotions will be one or the other. So you want to think about, how do I respond in a wise mind way here? How do I model an emotional response, an appropriate and emotional response to being frustrated or feeling disrespected or, being upset? We can use ourselves as that raw modelling basis. So some of you will have seen me talk a little bit about this earlier, and some of you won't. So I'm going to go through this. Professor Jeanette Treasure from the Maudsley Hospital in London developed this analogy, and it's a really great one for working with young people with mental health difficulties and young people more broadly. We all have reactions and emotions. So the reactions at the top, we've got the kangaroo, which is accommodating. Now, it's really difficult seeing a young person in distress, and lots of us, our natural preference is to make better, to problem solve, to fix. It's not nice seeing a young person in distress, and when they're very young, that's what we do. We make things better, we do things for young people. However, if we keep doing that through their adolescence and through to their early adulthood, a couple of things happen. First of all, young people aren't able to develop their own problem-solving skills and their own emotional resilience. And 2, we can end up colluding with some quite unhelpful behaviour. So it's entirely natural. It's completely understandable that we have this protective paternal, maternal instinct towards our young people to want to make things better. However, that isn't always the most helpful response. Similarly, we have the rhinoceros here. As adults, we're very much in control of our own lives. We dictate kind of where we go, what we wear, who we hang out with, what we do for work. We're in control. And when something comes along in our life where we feel out of control, we can end up feeling helpless, which then provokes a response of over-control, and you will do what I say. I want to tell you, do this. The problem with that, whilst it's an understandable reaction, is it often results in conflict. So when a young person seemingly is not listening or responding to the instructions that you give, you're more likely to become over-controlled, cross and angry, and it will escalate and cause conflict. So what we want to strive for and aim for is being dolphin-like. Now when dolphins have a baby, what they do is they swim out in front and they very much guide and show the way. As the young dolphin gets older, they swim side by side. So the parent dolphin is still there, nurturing, offering support, showing them the way, but it's more of a kind of equal journey. And as the young dolphin gets older still, then it swims out in front with the parent behind. So the young dolphin is on its own journey, on its own path, but the parent is still very much there, offering support and guidance. But the young dolphin has got more autonomy, independence and freedom. And this is true of what we try and do with young people. When we love them and nurture them and encourage them, we take a lead when they're very young, we kind of give them more responsibility as they get a bit older, and eventually they're on their own path and own route, but with your love and support. When a young person has a mental health difficulty, you may need to swim side by side that little bit longer, or out in front that little bit longer. Because young people with mental health difficulties may struggle with certain aspects and may need a little longer to develop in ways that other children without mental health difficulties don't struggle with. So if you can kind of hold on to that analogy, it sometimes takes out some of the frustration or worry that you experience as a parent or carer. On the bottom here, we've got some more animals. We've got the ostrich, which is around minimisation, head in the sand. When you're really busy and you're living busy lives and you're juggling lots of different demands, it's really easy to minimise when a young person is stressed or stroppy or upset. Because in the realms of your life and all the things you've got to do, it might not seem that important to you at that moment in time. So it's easy to brush it to one side. Oh, it's just friendship difficulties, or they've got exams, or they'll get over it, it's hormones, etc. However, if we minimise too much, the difficulty is that sometimes young people then may feel really invalidated. They may not feel heard, they may not feel understood, and they may not come to you if those difficulties get more severe or more serious. On the other side, we've got the jellyfish. Now, if anybody's ever had the experience of very well-meaning people trying to give you advice with your own child, quite quickly provokes quite a defensive response, and they're all very well meaning. Just try this, have you tried that, have you thought about this, I read a really good article, why don't I send you a link for this? All well meaning, but you end up feeling like a total failure as a parent. You already feel bad enough, and then if you have a professional, whether it's an education, social care, healthcare professional, say you really need to be doing it like this, that just compounds the issue further, and you get a very prickly response and a very defensive response, which is totally understandable, but nevertheless that then breaks down communication and it makes it very difficult for agencies to work together. So what we want to do is aim to be more dog-like. Not just any dog, we want to be the St. Bernard. You don't want to be a terrier, like yapping. You want to be St. Bernard. Now I'm assured, not having met one, but they're very placid, docile, loving, always happy to see you, faithful. And I guess the point being that young people generally can be quite insecure, and they crave and they need and they deserve that containment and that unconditional love and support. So even when you've had vile responses of being sworn at, or you've had raging arguments, They often do that because they feel safe enough, because they know that you love them unconditionally. And that's what we want to be giving the message. You can still say that behaviour is unacceptable, but I love you, I want to support you, we're going to get through this together. So this is quite nice metaphors because it depersonalises, it takes blame away, because we never want to blame you as parents or carers, but it's sometimes about saying, oh, that was a bit of a rhino response, how could I have done that a bit differently? Or how can I be more dog-like next time that happens? And it's a really lovely metaphor. Young people that I work with buy into this, and it just gives people a language to be able to think about their emotional responses and their behaviour. So I'm going to move on to some suggestions. As adult caregivers, we're role models. So it's okay to not be okay, it's okay to struggle, it's okay to feel overwhelmed, but it's what you do with that. And I guess our number one message when we work with our young people is share, talk, tell somebody, don't keep it bottled up. Because even if the person you go to isn't really sure, chances are they will know somebody who will know somebody. So if it's going to a teacher, if they're not the appropriate person or they don't feel skilled or able to, chances are they will then know who it is that they can connect that young person with. If it's a parent or carer that's told and you're feeling like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with this, chances are though, you'll be able to ask for support or help from the school, from the GP, from kind of another service. So it's about letting young people know, get help and support, but also your own. Because it's really hard working with young people in distress or crisis. It's really hard supporting a young person with mental health difficulties. The reason we go into this job is because we care and because we want to make a difference. And so having a young person that's struggling is hard. So if you're a professional, absolutely need supervision and to talk through things that you're finding hard. In the NHS, in our CAMHS service, we have really solid sound supervision because that's important. It's important that you stay well when you're working with young people. Sharing information is absolutely key. Whenever I've been involved in kind of serious investigations or things have gone wrong, the thing that always comes out is communication and information not being shared. So if a young person is struggling at home, it's really important you let the school know. If a young person is struggling at school, it's really important you let the parent or carer know. If a young person is involved with another agency quite closely, whether it's a hobby or an activity, let that facilitator know that there's an issue or there's a struggle or there's a dilemma, so that you've got joined up care and it's consistent and you're all giving the same responses to that young person, because that will be containing. So sharing information is really important. Even though it is really distressing seeing a young person upset and struggling, they still have a degree of responsibility as to how they manage that. Obviously it depends on their age. The younger they are, the harder that is. But teenagers absolutely have choices about how they can manage. And it's about sometimes not telling a young person what they can do and how to do it. It's about giving them options so that they can make some choices for themselves. If a young person is known to a service, it's well worth checking whether they've got a relapse or crisis plan. So a lot of young people under the CAMHS service do have exactly that. And often that will have been collaboratively agreed and drawn up with a young person, with their family, and it outlines really nicely what some of the triggers are, what their early warning signs that they're not coping are, what it looks like when they're in crisis, what helps, what doesn't help, what can the young person do themselves, how do they take responsibility, what can families do, and what can others do. So it's well worth asking the question if your young person's in distress. If the young person doesn't have one of those plans, we can absolutely get access to the resources. I know I've got colleagues in the room who've done the crisis presentation, and we've got those resources on our CAMHS stand. It's a great idea for all young people to have, and if it's collaboratively done with a young person, they're more likely to buy into it and engage with it. A few what not to do, All of these have been taken from direct clinical experience. So some of them you might think, surely that doesn't happen. I guarantee everything on here has happened, okay? We can't ask young people to keep promises they just can't keep. That's an incredible amount of pressure for you and for that young person. You can't ever promise a young person you're not going to tell somebody, particularly if you're a professional, okay? It's about safeguarding, it's about keeping young people safe and well. Information sharing is absolutely key. We're all bound by the kind of confidentiality, but if a young person or another young person is at risk, it's vital that we share that information and safeguard that young person. Don't ask a young person promises they can't keep, such as promising not to hurt themselves again. Now, I absolutely get where this comes from, particularly if you're a parent or a carer. You're desperate, you're absolutely desperate for that young person to not hurt themselves. However, that's just too much of a big ask for a young person, and the guilt and shame and worry that they will feel if they then go on to harm themselves after they've made that promise may mean that they don't disclose, which actually increases the risk. It's really difficult, but what we need to be able to do is create an environment that's containing enough for a young person to share when they're at their most vulnerable or risky, so we can help and support them. And often in the beginning parts of the journey, it is after they've done something as opposed to before they've done something. But the more they get that consistent response of, it's okay to tell me, we're going to support you, we're going to be dog-like and love you no matter what, they will start to share earlier and earlier. When a young person's in crisis or struggling, very anxious, asking lots of open-ended questions is very difficult. The part of the brain that does logic shuts down when you're in crisis or distressed or anxious. So the link between being able to rationalise and be lucid and give you a clear explanation and their emotions will be gone. So they may not be able to answer really long open-ended questions or give you a rationale or reasons why. Why did you do that? I don't know. You must know. Actually, no. They maybe don't know why they've done that. And kind of, it's really important we don't make assumptions as to what's going on for a young person. If we have young people that engage in quite repetitive behaviour, whether that's kind of anxiety episodes or maybe episodes of self-harm or other behaviour that's associated with mental difficulties, we don't want to assume that, oh, that person has engaged in self-harm because of X, Y, and Z. Each and every time could be different. So we want to maintain a level of curiosity, of openness, and not be too quick to jump to assumptions as to why a young person's doing what they're doing. Might seem really obvious, but actually one of the strongest points around mental resilience and emotional coping is having a balanced lifestyle. So young children are great at this. When they're at primary school, they're plugged into all sorts. They have swimming lessons, they go to Cubs and Scouts and Brownies, they do after school clubs. They're involved in all sorts of stuff where they're making friends, they're meeting people, they're learning new skills, they're achieving things, which builds their sense of resilience, their self-esteem, their confidence, their social ability. And I don't know what happens, but it gets to secondary school and those things by and large fall by the wayside. And young people generally not very good at entertaining themselves, get very bored, very restless. They game, they're on their phones or on their tablets, but it's quite isolative activities. So then they get quite, insecure, self-conscious, socially anxious, because they're not having the opportunity to mix, meet people, make friends, have experiences where they've achieved something, they've learnt something, they're enjoying something. So life generally becomes school and then hanging out in your bedroom. So what we want to be doing is promoting young people to engage in all kinds of different activities, because that's what will help. It's about scaffolding, creating emotional scaffolding. So if one area is really tough, let's say it's GCSEs at the moment, so it's really tough, school is a really tough thing. If you don't have any other scaffolding, life's suddenly pretty hard. However, if you've got mates and you've got activities that you can go to, even for like an hour a week, It's going to break up your week a little bit. It's going to give you some headspace, give you some respite. It's going to give you something else to talk about and think about and do. Does that make sense? So we need this kind of scaffolding around us, and we need to role model that as adults. I'd invite you to reflect on your own lives. What do you do for your self-care? Outside of your job, your career, outside of your relationships and your family, what do you do? What do you do in the evenings? What do you do at weekends? What do you do in your holidays? Do you do stuff for you? I don't know. But actually we need to role model this stuff. You don't have to be the best at something either. Because I think that's the other thing that happens in secondary school. It's very competitive. Whereas, you just used to go to swimming lessons so you could learn to swim and have fun. Suddenly it's like, can you swim the fastest? Did you make the team? And so the pleasure gets lost in some of that stuff. And there's plenty of young people that really thrive and love competitive sports and love all of that. Great. But also there's some enjoyment and joy in just doing, and not doing for attainment or success, just doing because you love it. Goals and hooks. It's all about motivation. We all need reasons to do things in life. And it's about, what motivates and inspires a young person. What are they interested in? So if they're struggling, if their motivation is low, how do we kind of capture their imagination? How do we inspire them to fall in love with life and the joy of life? It's very difficult when young people are at school because there are so many expectations on them. So many things they must do, they should do, they have to do that they don't enjoy, that don't particularly thrive at, yet they have to still do it. So how can we motivate them in other ways? So it's listening and tuning into what are they inspired by, and how can we help them build that into their life? Because all of those things will create a sense of self-esteem and pleasure and mastery. All of those basics that goes back to Maslow that we need to thrive with our emotional, physical, mental health. I'm going to go through a few resources here. We've got something called our A to Z of coping. Here we have an adolescent version. Lots of kind of different ideas and strategies. And here we have a slightly more primary-based A to Z, all kinds of different ideas. Now, here's the thing with coping strategies. A lot of people say to me, yeah, it didn't work. And when I say, what do you mean by work? Often young people will say to me, yeah, still felt anxious or still felt bad. I'm like, yeah, because actually you can't eliminate an emotion. You cannot get rid of emotion. So coping strategies are not designed to get rid of emotion. Coping strategies are exactly that. They help you manage and tolerate the emotion until either the intensity passes or you're more within your window of tolerance to do something adaptive about it. So yes, if your expectation is this coping strategy is going to make me feel better, yeah, it's going to fail. It's not going to work. Of course it's not going to work. So when we're working and supporting young people and we're encouraging them to use coping strategies, first of all, we need to check out expectations and reset them. Because coping strategies are exactly that. It's just about managing the emotion, tolerating it until the intensity comes down so it's less overwhelming. It's not going to get rid of the emotion. And different things work for different people. And you have to try it more than once. You can't expect to get onto a bicycle and know instantly how to ride, or ride with no hands. You have to practice, practice, practice. You have to then know and learn your art. And the same as with coping skills. You have to learn when to use them and how to use them. If you start using a coping strategy when you're already out of your window of tolerance and you're at like 100% max emotion, it's not going to have an impact. Some of the things we need to do with young people is help them see their early warning signs so that they can start using the coping strategies to maybe prevent them from tipping out of their window of tolerance and keeping them within.
I tried the I statements I was told to work with my daughter and saying, I feel this because, without saying you and putting the blame. And I was like, right, I'm so in the mindset, I'm going to do this. And I went, I feel upset. And she went, I don't care how you feel. I went, that didn't work. And I was like, okay, try it again another day, because it was really, really hard. I was all prepared, I'd set myself up and it just blew straight up.
But you role modelled, I'm feeling, and then she came straight back with, albeit in very emotional mind, I. So actually, you've done exactly the same thing, it was just the way that it was delivered was slightly different, right? And through practice and helping, she may then learn, I statement is, yeah, you know, it's okay to say, I am really angry. Yeah. Yeah. Coping boxes. I'm really nearly out of time, so I will fly through this. This is a huge one. It's for demo purposes, and we have these in our clinic. These are filled with resources, all kinds of different things that help with self-soothing. We use our 5 senses, so smell, taste, sight, sound, touch. Everything we've got from stress balls and skipping ropes and bubble wrap, I had to think of the word then, and we've got marbles and feathers and nice smelling soaps and all kinds of things that just help think about the window of tolerance, soothing experiences that will help people to come down. Now, you can fill this with personal stuff. You can put photos of your friends and your family. You can put letters and postcards of places you've been, positive experiences. You can write playlists for music to help you keep calm or to re-energize you. You can put a list of your favorite films. The idea behind this is when you're distressed or you're upset or you're anxious or you're sad, it's really hard to decision make and it's really hard to remember what works. So if you have a box filled with stuff that you can go to, that you've put together when you've been kind of calm and really thought about it, more likely to use it and it's likely to be helpful. We've got on our website, the Hampshire CAMHS website, hampshirecams.nhs.uk, there's a really lovely quick animation, there's the YouTube link, of what a coping box is for, how you put one together, how you use one. Young people, really young little ones and adolescents love this because they can paint their box, they can wrap it, they can do whatever they want with it, they can keep it in, you know, their house, they can, you know, have little mini ones that they take to school. We've got like matchbox size ones they put in their pocket and carry around as grounding objects. They can put them in their lockers, they can keep them in their bag. It's a way of kind of grounding and accessing things that are going to help you manage and tolerate your emotional responses.